hall on Prime was filled with students from across the galaxy. They were tall with their gray skin and sharp eyes. They were with their soft blue bodies and gentle movement. There were at least a dozen other species that Cole had learned to recognize during her 3 months at the Galactic Academy of Strategic Intelligence. She sat in the middle row and watched instructor move his forearms as he explained the finer points of interrogation analysis. 34 years old and held the rank of lieutenant commander in Earth's intelligence division. She had been selected for this 6-month exchange program because her superiors believed could learn valuable techniques from alien civilizations. What those superiors did not tell the academy was the real reason they sent her, had a gift that made her perfect for this kind of work. She remembered everything. Students around her used some kind of recording device. They used holographic tablets that flowed in front of their faces. They had neural implants that stored information directly in their brains. Even the small furry creatures from the outer systems had tiny machines that captured every word, sat with her hands folded on the desk in front of her. She had no tablet. She had no implant. She simply watched and listened. There was a species known for their intelligence and their 4 powerful arms. He had been teaching at the academy for over 20 years and was considered one of the finest minds in the field of strategic intelligence. Today he was explaining how to read microexpressions in different species during questioning. It was complex material that required careful attention to detail. Name sat 2 rows behind. He had noticed her empty desk on the first day of classes and had been watching her ever since. Came from a military family and took his studies very seriously. He found the human behavior disrespectful and insulting to the great instructor. After 3 months of watching her sit with nothing in front of her, finally decided to act. Raised his hand and waited for her to acknowledge him. The instructor paused his lecture and nodded toward the student, stood and pointed one long finger at. I must bring something to your attention, said in a voice loud enough for the entire hall to hear. The human representative has attended your lectures for 3 months without once taking a single note. I believe this shows disrespect for your teachings and for the academy. Head in the room turned toward. She felt their eyes on her but kept her expression calm. This moment had been coming for a long time and she had prepared herself for it. The instructor walked slowly toward her row. His forearm crossed over his chest as he looked down at her empty desk. His expression was hard to read, but could see a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Is this true, Lieutenant Commander Cole?" he asked. "You have been attending my lectures without recording any of the material." Stood up out of respect and faith, the instructor. "Yes, instructor, that is correct." Murmurs spread through the lecture hall. Several students whispered to each other in languages did not understand. She could guess what they were saying. The humans were arrogant. The humans thought they were too good for proper study. The humans would fail their examinations and prove that Earth was not ready for galactic society. I asked why, he said. "Do you believe my teachings are not worth preserving?" "No, instructor," replied. "I believe your teachings are extremely valuable. I simply do not need recording equipment to preserve them." From his seat, she claims she does not need notes. Perhaps humans learn differently. Perhaps they learn nothing at all. Held up one of his hands to silence the student. He studied with new interest. "You claim you can remember my lectures without assistance. That is a bold statement, Lieutenant Commander. Would you care to prove it?" "If you wish," said. "Well, repeat the last 15 minutes of my lecture, word for word." Ring stopped. The entire hall went silent. 15 minutes of complex technical instruction about microexpressions and species-specific behavioral analysis. No one could repeat that from memory. Not even the students with neural implants could recall exact words without playing back their recording. Closed her eyes for a moment. She did not need to search for the memory. It was simply there, as clear and vivid as the moment it happened. She could see standing at the front of the room. She could hear his voice with perfect clarity. She opened her eyes and began to speak. He said, "When analyzing subjects, pay close attention to the movement of the secondary eyelid. Unlike the primary eyelid, which they control consciously, the secondary eyelid responds to emotional stress involuntarily. A rapid flutter indicates deception, while a slow closing suggests the subject is accessing genuine memory." Continue without pause. She repeated every word that had spoken, including the moment when he had corrected himself about the difference between and stress responses. She included his brief pause when he searched for the right term to describe the phenomenon. She even mimicked the slight change in his tone when he emphasized important points. She finished, the silence in the room had changed. It was no longer skeptical. It was something closer to fear. He looked at her for a long moment. His forearms had dropped to his sides and his expression showed genuine surprise. In 20 years of teaching, he had never seen anything like this. "It was exact," he said quietly. "Every word, every pause. How is it possible?" At his eyes calmly. "I have a condition that humans call I remember everything I experience. Every conversation, every face, every moment of my life since I was a child. My superiors trained me to use the gift for intelligent work. I do not need to take notes, instructor, because I cannot forget even if I wanted to." Stopped laughing. He sat in his seat with his gray face gone pale. The other students looked at with expressions ranging from wonder to suspicion. A human who remembered everything. A living recording device who could steal their secrets simply by being in the room. Instructor nodded slowly. "I see. You may be seated, Lieutenant Commander Cole." She kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt a familiar mix of satisfaction and concern. Her gift had been revealed. Now the real test would begin. She did not know it yet, but she had just made enemies who would do anything to remove her from the academy, and she would remember every single one of them. Spread through the academy faster than light traveled through space. Within 2 days, every student and faculty member knew about the human who could remember everything. Some were curious and approached with questions about her gift. Others avoided her completely as if she were some kind of dangerous creature that might steal their thoughts. A few watched her with open hostility and whispered among themselves when she walked past. She attended her classes and kept to her usual routine. She ate her meals alone in the dining hall because none of the other species wanted to sit near someone who would remember every word they said for her. She exercised in the training facility during the quiet hours when few students were present. She spent her evenings in her small quarters reviewing her memories and organizing them into the debrief reports she would eventually send back to Earth. The 5th day after her public demonstration, she received a summons from High Scholar, the director of the academy. The message was brief and formal. It requested her presence in the director's private office at the 14th hour. Knew this meeting was coming. She had been waiting for it. Her office was located in the old second of Prime, a tower that had stood for over 1,000 years. Walked through corridors lined with artifacts from dozens of civilizations. She passed statues of famous scholars and holographic displays showing the academy's greatest achievement. By the time she reached the director's door, she had memorized every detail of the route. Scholar was an elderly with deep blue skin that had faded to pale purple with age. Her movements were slow and careful, but her eyes were sharp and missed nothing. She gestured for to sit in a chair designed for species much larger than human. climbed into it, and waited. Commander Cole said in a voice that sounded like flowing water, "Thank you for coming. I have been reviewing your file since your demonstration and instructor's lecture. I must admit that Earth's intelligence division was not entirely honest with us about your abilities." "We're not dishonest," replied. "They simply did not volunteer information that was not requested. My medical condition is not classified. It is simply rare and not well documented in human scientific literature." A soft sound that might have been a laugh. A careful answer. "You have been well trained in diplomatic language. Tell me about this condition. I wish to understand it from your perspective rather than from a medical file." Read her words carefully. "I was born with. It means I have extremely detailed autobiographical memory. I remember every day of my life since I was about 3 years old. I can recall conversations word for word, describe faces I saw only once, and recreate documents I read decades ago. My trainers on Earth add techniques for eidetic recall, which allows me to memorize information intentionally as well as automatically. And you cannot forget, even if you wish to. Oh, everything stays, the good memories and the bad ones, the useful information and the useless details. It is not always a gift, high scholar. Sometimes it feels more like a burden." Slowly, "I can imagine. Memory can be a heavy thing to carry." She paused and folded her thin hands together. "I must tell you something unpleasant, Lieutenant Commander. Several members of my faculty have requested that you be removed from the exchange program." Expected this, but hearing it confirmed still sent a cold feeling through her chest. "On what ground?" "Argue that your ability gives humanity an unfair advantage. You can memorize our intelligence techniques, our strategic doctrines, our classified training methods, and carry all of it back to Earth without any physical evidence that you took anything. You are, they say, a living spy device that cannot be detected or stopped." "I'm a student," said. "I came here to learn, not to steal." "That may be true, but how can we know for certain? How can we trust that the information you carry will not be used against us someday?" Quiet for a moment. She had prepared arguments for the situation, but now that she was here, a different thought came to her. She decided to take a risk. "Scholar, may I ask you a question?" Let her head, "You may." "Since my classes have 4 arms, that gives them significant advantages in combat training and physical manipulation acts. Do you ban them from those courses because of their natural gifts?" "Of course not. That would be discrimination based on biology." "Since have neural structures that allow them to process multiple streams of information simultaneously. That gives them advantages in data analysis and multitasking exercises. You limit their participation." "No, we consider it a strength they bring to our community." Forward in her oversized chair. "Then why should I be punished for the way my brain was built? I did not choose this ability. I was born with it. Earth recognized it and trained me to use it constructively. Is that so different from what any species does with its narrow gifts?" Silent for a long time, her pale eyes steady with an expression that was difficult to read. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than before. "A fair point, Lieutenant Commander. I cannot argue that we treat biological advantages consistently. However, I must warn you that fairness will not protect you from those who feel threatened. You have made powerful enemies simply by existing. Instructor himself has expressed concerns about your presence in his classes." Instructor felt surprised for the first time. He seemed impressed during my demonstration. Was impressed, and perhaps that is what frightens him. A student who can memorize his entire career worth of teaching in a single semester. A student who might return to Earth and train others to match his expertise. For a teacher, that can feel like a kind of theft. Understood, she had not considered how her gift might appear from his perspective. To him, she was not just a student. She was a threat to everything he had built. "Well, be careful," she said. "I will do nothing to justify their concerns." It was from her seat signaling that the meeting was ending. "Be more than careful, Lieutenant Commander Cole. Be perfect. Because they will be watching for any mistake, any excuse to have you removed, and I may not be able to protect you when that moment comes." Down from the large chair and walked to the door. She paused before leaving and looked back at the elderly. "Thank you for the warning, High Scholar. I will remember it." That soft laughing sound again. "I have no doubt that you will. You will remember everything. That is precisely what makes you so dangerous." The office and walked back through the corridors of ancient artifacts. She memorized every step, every face she passed, every whispered conversation she overheard. Somewhere in the academy, someone was waiting for her to make a mistake. She would not give them the satisfaction. Sci-Fi Strategic Simulation was the most important exercise of the semester. Every student at the academy participated in a massive war game that tested their ability to analyze intelligence, predict enemy movements, and coordinate responses across multiple star systems. The simulation used real data from historical conflicts, modified just enough to prevent any species from having an unfair advantage based on prior knowledge. Assigned to a team of mixed species. Her teammates included a young named who specialized in communications analysis, 2 officers who handled tactical planning, and a small furry creature from the outer systems whose name she could not properly pronounce, but who was brilliant at decoding encrypted messages. They worked together for 3 intense days, and despite the initial awkwardness, they began to function as a unit. The morning of the 4th day, everything fell apart. Eating breakfast in the dining hall when security officers appeared at the main entrance. They were accompanied by and 3 other students who pointed directly at her. The officers marched through the hall and stopped at her table. "And Commander Cole," the lead officer said, "you are required for questioning regarding a security breach. Please come with us." The eye in the dining hall turned toward her, stood slowly and kept her expression calm even though her heart was beating faster. "May I ask what this is about?" Sci-Fi military data was transmitted to the Syndic sometime during the last 48 hours. The data was accessed from terminals within the simulation center. You had access to those terminals. Forward with a look of triumph on his gray face. She memorized everything. She could have read the classified files and transmitted them without leaving any physical evidence. She's a spy for Earth or perhaps for the Syndicate itself. But steadily, "I have transmitted nothing. I have stolen nothing. If you examine my communications records, you will find that I have sent only routine reports to my superiors on Earth, all of which passed through Academy security screening." "Proves nothing," said. "You could have passed the information to a third party. You could have hidden the transmission in ways we cannot detect. Your ability makes you the perfect spy." The security officer raised a hand to silence him. "These accusations will be investigated properly. Lieutenant Commander, please come with us." With them without resistance. She knew that fighting would only make her look guilty. She spent the next 6 hours in a small room answering questions from Academy security and 2 investigators who had arrived within hours of the breach being discovered. They asked her about her movements, her communications, her interactions with other students. They asked her to account for every minute of the past 48 hours. Did exactly that. She described every moment in perfect detail, every conversation she had overheard, every person she had seen near the simulation center. The investigators seemed both impressed and disturbed by the precision of her account. When they finally released her, they told her to remain on the station and not attempt to leave. To her quarters and sat alone in the small room. She replayed the last 2 days in her memory, searching for anything unusual. Something did not feel right about the situation. The leak had happened at exactly the moment when she was most vulnerable to accusation. The timing was too perfect. Closed her eyes and let her mind wander through her memories. She saw herself walking to the simulation center on the first morning. She saw an instructor standing near the entrance, talking with a security guard. That was unusual, was not part of the simulation exercise. He had no reason to be there. But further, she remembered seeing again on the same day, this time near the data terminals in the back of the center. He had been carrying a small device that she had not recognized at the time. Now, as she examined the memory more closely, she realized it looked like a portable transmission unit. The memory surfaced. On the evening of the same day, she had been walking back to her quarters when she heard a faint electronic pulse from a nearby corridor. She had thought nothing of it at the time, but now she remembered that it had emerged from that corridor just moments later. His forearms had been tense and his movements were hurried. Her eyes, she did not have proof, but she had a pattern, had been in places she should not have been, at times that coincided with the security breach, and he had been one of the faculty members who wanted her removed from the academy. He needed to speak with High Scholar. The director agreed to meet her late that night in the same ancient office where they had talked before, listened without interruption as explained what she had observed. When she finished, the elderly sat in silence for a long moment. These are serious accusations, said finally. Instructor has served at the academy for over 20 years. He is respected throughout the galaxy. Not making accusations, replied. I am reporting observations. I saw him in locations that seemed unusual. I saw him carrying equipment that did not belong in the simulation center. I heard a transmission pulse from a corridor he was using. These things may have innocent explanations, but they may not. And what do you propose? Give me 48 hours. Let me investigate before they formally demand my arrest. My memories contain information that no security recording captured. I may be able to find the truth. Her with those sharp pale eyes. If you are wrong, you will have destroyed your reputation and your career. If you are right, you will have exposed a traitor who has been operating under our nose for years. Either way, you will make powerful enemies. Already have powerful enemies, said. At least the way I have a chance to prove me innocent. Director nodded slowly. Very well, 48 hours. But you must understand that I cannot protect you if you fail. The Dominion is already preparing formal charges. If you cannot find evidence, I will have no choice but to hand you over. Then bowed respectfully. Thank you, High Scholar. I will not waste the chance. Left the office and began to walk through the station, retracing every step she had taken during the past week. Somewhere in her memories was the evidence she needed. She just had to find it before time ran out. The first 12 hours of her investigation walking through the station and reviewing her memories, she retraced every route she had taken during the simulation exercise. She examined every face she had seen, every conversation she had overheard, every small detail that had seemed unimportant at the time. Slowly, a picture began to form. Trucker had been in the simulation center on 4 separate occasions during the exercise. Each time, he had positioned himself near the classified data terminals. Each time, he had carried the same small device that now recognized as a modified transmission unit. And each time, there had been a brief electronic pulse within minutes of his departure. Memories were not evidence. Under Galactic Union law, personal recollection could not be used to convict someone of a crime. The legal systems of 100 different species had argued about this for centuries and eventually agreed that only physical evidence or confession could support criminal charges. Perfect memory might tell her the truth, but it could not prove anything in court. Needed to confess, or she needed to catch him in the act of another transmission. Her findings to director on the morning of the same day. She laid out everything she had observed and explained her conclusion. Had been selling academy secrets to the Cynic for years. The accusation against her was deliberately orchestrated to create a scapegoat and deflect attention from the real traitor. Reasoning is sound, said, but as you know, your memories cannot be used as evidence. How do you propose to prove this? Need him to transmit again, replied. If academy security can catch him in the act, my memories become unnecessary. The physical evidence will speak for itself. How will you convince him to take such a risk? He knows the station is on high alert. He knows every transmission is being monitored. Thought about this carefully. I will give him a reason to panic. I will make him believe that his cover is about to collapse. When people panic, they make mistakes. Explained her plan. There was a faculty meeting scheduled for that afternoon to discuss her case and decide whether to hand her over to the authorities. Would be permitted to attend and present her defense. During the meeting, she would casually mention that her investigation had revealed the true traitor. She would not name directly. Instead, she would imply that she had found evidence pointing to someone else entirely, someone innocent. If he was guilty, he would realize that his frame was failing. He would need to warn his handlers in the syndicate that the investigation was going in the wrong direction. He would need to adjust their plans. And to do that, he would have to transmit. It's a dangerous gamble, said. If he does not take the bait, you will have accomplished nothing. If he does not take the bait, I am no worse off than I am now. But I believe he will. I have watched him for months. I remember every lecture, every gesture, every expression. He is arrogant and he believes he is smarter than everyone around him. When he thinks his plan is falling apart, he will not be able to resist trying to fix it. It was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. Very well. I will position security near the communication center tonight. If it appears, we will be ready. The faculty meeting took place in a large conference room overlooking the stars. Sat at one end of a long table, surrounded by instructors and administrators from a dozen different species. And 2 other officials sat on the opposite end, waiting to hear her defense before formally demanding her extradition. Calmly and carefully, she explained that she had spent the last day reviewing her memories and searching for anything that might explain the security breach. She described her movements during the simulation exercise and accounted for every minute of her time. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added one final detail. Believe I know who transmitted the classified data, she said. My investigation has identified a suspect, and I will present my evidence tomorrow morning. The true traitor will be exposed and my innocence will be proven. Did not look at as she spoke. She kept her eyes on the officials and watched their expression shift from skepticism to interest. But in her peripheral vision, he saw his forearms tense slightly. His jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second before he regained control. He had taken the bait. Knight waited in a storage room near the communication center with the director and a team of 4 security officers. They had disabled the lights in the corridor and positioned themselves where they could see anyone approaching the transmitting equipment. The hours passed slowly in the darkness. After midnight, a door opened at the far end of the corridor, heard footsteps and recognized the rhythm immediately. She had memorized the sound of SWAT months ago without even realizing she was doing it. Strucker moved quick through the shadows toward the communication center. He carried the same small device had seen during the simulation exercise. He reached the transmission terminal and began entering commands with two of his forehands while the other two kept watch. Now whispered. Lights came on suddenly and the security officers moved forward with weapon drawn. Spun around with shock on his face. For a moment he froze, caught in the act with his transmission device still connected to the terminal. Then he moved. It was faster than expected. One of his arms swept toward the nearest security officer while another reached for a weapon hidden in his clothing. He was a trained intelligence operative who had been living a double life for years. He knew how to fight. Had been watching him for months. She had memorized every technique he taught in his defensive combat lectures. She had studied his movements during training demonstration, and she had been waiting for exactly the moment. Turned toward her with his weapon raised, he stepped inside his reach and struck at the nerve cluster on his lower right arm. It was a technique he had taught 3 weeks ago, designed to disable opponents with multiple limbs. His arm went numb and the weapon clattered to the floor. He swung at her with another arm, but she ducked under it and drove her elbow into his side. Another technique from his own lectures. He stumbled backward and the security officers closed in around him. He gasped as they restrained his forearms. How did you know those moves? Looked at him calmly. You taught them to me 3 weeks ago during your lecture on multi-limb combat techniques. I remember every word you said, every demonstration you gave. You trained me to defeat you without even knowing it. At her with something like horror in his eyes. He had underestimated her from the beginning. He had seen a fragile human with no natural weapons and assumed she was harmless. He had forgotten that humans carried their most dangerous weapons inside their mind. Security officers led him away, and Director stepped forward to examine the transmission device. The evidence was clear and undeniable. Had been caught in the act of betraying the Academy to the Syndicate. Done, Lieutenant Commander, said quietly. You have saved yourself and exposed a traitor who has been operating for longer than we knew. The security officers disappeared around the corner with their prisoner. She felt no satisfaction, only a tired sense of relief. The trap had worked. Her innocence would be proven, but she knew this was not the end. There would be consequences and complications. There would be new enemies who blamed her for his downfall. She would remember all of them. All of Instructor Lad 3 weeks. Investigators from 6 different species examined the evidence and traced his activity back over 15 years. He had been selling Academy secrets to the Syndicate, and before was even accepted in the Earth Intelligence Division. The classified data he transmitted had compromised operations across the galaxy and led to the death of intelligence officers from multiple civilizations. Testify on the second day of the trial. She recounted everything she had observed in precise detail, from its unusual presence in the simulation center to the exact timing of the transmission pulses she had heard. The court listened in silence as she described memories that spanned months of careful observation. When she finished, even the prosecutors who had demanded her arrest seemed impressed. Convicted on all charges and sentenced to permanent imprisonment in a facility designed for the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy. As the guards led him from the courtroom, he turned and looked at with hatred burning in his eyes. Think you have won, he said, but you have only shown them what you really are, a weapon, tool. They will never trust you now. They will always fear what you might remember. At his gaze without flinching, I am not a weapon. I am a student who came here to learn. You were the one who chose to become something else. Guards pulled him away and the courtroom doors closed behind him. Sat alone for a moment before getting up to leave. She knew that was partly right. Her gift had saved her, but it had also changed the way everyone looked at her. She would never be just another student again. Her in the corridor outside the courtroom. The student who had accused her so publicly now stood before her with his head bowed and his gray skin flushed with shame. Owe you an apology, he said quietly. I was wrong about you. I let my prejudice against humans cloud my judgment. I accused an innocent person and nearly helped a traitor seek justice. Him for a moment. She remembered every insult he had spoken, every sneer, every whispered comment about human weakness. But she also remembered that he had been manipulated by someone he trusted, had used his suspicion of humans as a tool. Were used, he said, knew how you felt about my species and he exploited it. The question is what you will do now that you know the truth. Looked up at her with something like hope in his eyes. I will do better. I will judge individuals by their actions, not by my assumptions about their species. That is all I can promise. It is enough, said. We all have to start somewhere. Left him standing in the corridor and walked to the director's office. The elderly had requested a private meeting before return to her classes. The ancient tower felt different now, as if the shadows had lifted slightly since arrest. Waiting for her with a cup of warm liquid that smelled like flowers. She gestured for her to sit in the oversized chair and poured her a cup as well. The Minion has formally apologized to Earth's diplomatic corps, said. They have withdrawn all accusations against you and have offered compensation for the stress you endured. Your government is quite pleased with how things turned out. I did not do it for my government, replied. I did it because I was innocent and I wanted the truth to come out. Slowly, I know, that is what makes you remarkable. You could have simply tried to prove your innocence. Instead, you exposed a traitor who had been harming the Academy for 15 years. You did more than clear your own name. You made all of us safer. Had help, you gave me the time I needed. You trusted me when everyone else believed I was guilty. Trusted the evidence of my own observations, said. You conducted yourself with dignity and intelligence throughout your time here. That told me more about your character than any accusation could. Down her cup and looked at it with an expression that was almost warm. I must admit that when you first arrived, I was skeptical about humanity's place in galactic society. Your species is young and inexperienced compared to most civilizations. You lack the physical advantages of the mental processing abilities of the technological heritage of the older races. I wondered what you could possibly contribute. And now, I understand that we were looking in the wrong places. Humanity's strength is not in your bodies or your technology. It is in your diversity. You produce individuals like yourself, people with gifts that no one else possesses, and you find ways to use those gifts constructively rather than fearing them. Consider this for a moment. My gift is rare even among humans. Most of my species cannot do what I do. Species recognized your gift and trained you to use it. They did not hide you away or treat you as a threat. They found a purpose for your ability that serves everyone. That is what humanity offers the galaxy, not soldiers or scientists or diplomats. Adaptability, the willingness to find value in differences rather than conformity. And walked to the window overlooking the stars. I have decided to recommend that the Academy expand its exchange program with Earth. We have much to learn from each other. Your species may be young, but you have perspectives that older civilizations have forgotten. Something warm spread through her chest. It was not just relief or satisfaction. It was something close with pride. Not pride in herself, but pride in what humanity could become if given the chance. You high scholar, I will do my best to honor the trust. Final day at the academy, returned to instructor's old lecture hall. A new teacher had taken over his classes, a young who seemed nervous about filling such large shoes. The students filed in and took their seats with their recording devices and neural implants ready to capture every word. In the middle row, with her hands folded on the imp desk, a young student in the row behind her leaned forward and tapped her shoulder. "Excuse me," the student said. "Are you the human who caught the trayer, the one who remembers everything?" "I am," replied. The student looked at her imp desk with curiosity. "Why are you not taking notes?" Slightly. It was the same question that had started everything months ago, but now she understood the answer better than she had before. "I'm not here to take notes," she said. "I am here to write my debrief reports, and all of you are teaching me everything I need to know." She began and listened carefully, storing every word in perfect detail. She would remember the moment for the rest of her life. She would remember the young's curious expression, the nervous new instructor, the light falling through the windows onto the ancient floors. She would remember how it felt to finally belong somewhere, even if that belonging came with a burden she could never sit down. Or in the academy, she knew there might be another spy, another secret, another test waiting to begin. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers that most species could not even imagine, but humanity was ready to face them. They had learned to find strength in their differences, turn weakness into advantage, to adapt and survive in a universe that often seemed designed to destroy them. It was just one human with one unusual gift, but she represented something larger than herself. She represented the possibility that even the young species could find a place among the stars. She would remember that possibility forever.